Okay, our shir this morning is dedicated in memory of Ruth's father, Rabbi Boris Gottlieb, on the occasion of his 16th yortzeit, Yisachar Dov ben Harav Mordechai Halevi, who served the Jewish community in Maine, and leaves behind, of course, a very, very wonderful legacy. Ruth, together with Lou, have been supporters of so much Torah learning and chesed in our community, which is certainly a tribute to her father's memory, to her parents' memory, and our learning this morning is adds to that zechus to his neshama. We're learning, so thank you, Ruth. So we're learning this morning Parshas Terumah, which launches us right into the Mishkan. It seems to be a little bit of a kind of an abrupt transition in the story from Matan Torah, right? Matan Torah, which Parshas Yisro and Mishpatim together comprise the presentation of the revelation at Sinai, and then everything that comes thereafter are mitzvos that are presented at Har Sinai. But clearly, we're being launched into a certain set of mitzvos, namely the mitzvos revolving around the Mishkan and the service in the Mishkan. And there's no real transition. There's no real indication that, okay, we're at Har Sinai, Matan Torah is over, and now the Matan Torah is over, the next logical thing is to build a Mishkan. The Torah just starts talking about the Mishkan without a segue, without any sort of segue from one to the next. And so that leaves us with the challenge of understanding why the Mishkan comes next. It may seem obvious, it may seem logical to many people, it may seem that way to you, but I would still like to question this because the Torah doesn't say it. The Torah doesn't say exactly why the Mishkan's next. The Torah tells us why we should build a Mishkan, and perhaps in understanding that reason that the Torah gives us for the Mishkan, we can answer the broader question of why the Mishkan comes next. And so that's, I think, how we're going to approach it. Try to understand the mitzvah of the Mishkan, and through that, understand why the Mishkan comes next in the Torah. So I think we're taking, the straightforward fundamental issue of the meaning behind the Mishkan, and using that to understand the narrative question, the narrative, why this comes next in the narrative. So again, we're on page 431 in the Steinsaltz, 444 in the Art Scroll. Vaydaber Hashem Moshe Lemor, Daber al bnei Yisrael v'kuli Terumah, me'es kol ish asher yidvenu libo tikhu es Terumah si. So the topic of the Mishkan really begins in a very practical way. The topic doesn't open up with, okay, we're going to build a Mishkan and this is how we're going to do it. Instead, it begins with, we're going to start a collection, and I'll tell you after I'm done explaining the collection, I'll tell you what the collection is for. Take for me a Terumah, donations, and Vezosa Terumah asher tikhu meitam, and this is what sort of donations you are going to collect. Zahav v'chesef unachoshes usacheles v'argamon v'solas shani v'sheish v'izim, all sorts of different materials, precious metals and dyes and wools. V'oros elim adamim v'oros techashim v'atzei shitim, and different kinds of leathers and wood. Shemen lamaor, oil for lighting. Bisamim l'shemen hamishcha, and bisamim v'liktoros hasamim. Avnei shoham v'avnei miluim leifo v'lachoshen, which again is interesting because it tells us to collect all these materials. Some of the materials it tells us what they're needed for. Some of the materials it doesn't say, right? It just tells us zahav v'chesef unachoshes, right? Gold, silver, and copper. Okay, great, or bronze. But it doesn't tell us what we need that gold and silver for. But when it gets to the oil, then it says we need oil for lighting. and the B'samim we need for the Shemen HaMishcha and for the Ketores. And the Avnei Shoham and Avnei Miluim we need for the ephod and the Choshen. We don't even know what an ephod and a Choshen is. We haven't been told yet what an ephod and a Choshen is. But it's interesting to note that that again, we're told to collect these materials. We're not told what they're for. We're going to be told what they're for next. And in the course of explaining to us, in the course of listing all of the materials, it tells us why we need some of the materials but not for others. Okay, what do we need? What do we need all this for? Pasuk Ches, v'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. You will make for me a mikdash. You will make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell in their midst. So we're going to collect all these materials in order to construct a mikdash, in order to construct a sanctuary. But again, I would just highlight the fact that it just tells us to build a mishkan and why we should build a mishkan. But the Torah does not indicate any sort of transition from Matan Torah to the mishkan that would explain why the mishkan comes next. I saw another question, which I don't believe we'll be able to answer today, but I think it's a very interesting question. I did a little bit of research on it, did not do enough, and it's almost an obvious question, and yet I don't see it discussed directly, or at least from this direction, and that is that if we're going to ask why we need to build a mishkan, there's another facet to that why question that we could ask, and that is, let's put ourselves in the narrative for a second. The Jewish people have just gotten the Torah. Hashem says He's going to bring us to the land of Israel after Matan Torah. The journey from Har Sinai to Israel it's an 11-day journey according to a pasuk in Devarim, or perhaps a little bit longer. Maybe it's a few weeks. But the 40 years in the desert that the 40 years that is decreed because of the sin of the spies, that sin has not happened yet. And so if the sin of the spies has not happened yet, that means it's going to be a short journey as of now, a short journey from Har Sinai to Eretz Yisrael. Why do we need to build a Mishkan for a short journey? Why not just wait till we get to the land of Israel and then build a permanent mikdash when we get to the land of Israel? Why are we building a Mishkan now? It seems to be a lot of effort for a very short amount of time. Why do we need a portable Mishkan for the few weeks it's going to take us to get from Har Sinai to the land of Israel? Remember, Chet HaMeraglim, the sin of the spies, has not happened yet. And so there's no 40 years on the horizon. Being in the desert for 40 years, I understand why you need a portable Mishkan. But why? But before that, if it's not going to be 40 years, at least as far as we know, then why build a Mishkan? Anybody have any ideas?
What about the an atonement for the golden calf? What's it an atonement?
Okay, very good. So we're going to talk about that. So maybe there's a debate. If the Torah is presenting things in order, one opinion is that this whole presentation of the Mishkan occurs following the sin of the golden calf, and so the Mishkan is an atonement for the sin of the golden calf. Very good. Maybe that's it.
I think, Rabbi, I think it's also just because you give people laws and you tell them things, unless you involve them in it, they don't really have a chance to participate and be in it. And in order to, it's a transition to make people participate and become aware and learn.
Very good. Very good. Excellent. And we're towards the end of our talk, we're going to touch on an idea from Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, Zichrono Livracha, who says exactly that. That Hashem wanted them to work on a common project. So thank you so much for mentioning that, because we are gonna get to both of those ideas. All right, good. All right, so let's take a look at some of the different opinions and see how we can answer these questions from the different perspectives. So one of the most well-known treatments of this issue is that of the Ramban. The Ramban in his commentary on this parsha gives a whole introduction to this parsha to frame for us to make this transition between Matan Torah and the Mishkan. That's exactly what the Ramban is doing in his approach. He is making this transition for us. I'm just going to read a couple excerpts from the Ramban. Just bear with me. Kasher diber Hashem im Yisrael panim b'fanim. When Hashem spoke face to face the Aseret Sadibros and commanded some of the mitzvos through Moshe, right? Yisrael kiblu aleim lasos, and the Jewish people accepted all this upon themselves. V'karasi mahem bris al kol zeh, and they made a covenant over all of these mitzvos that were presented. Me'ata hinehem lo la'am v'hu lohem le'elohim. So that was a fulfillment of one of the promises that Hashem made, one component of the bris, which is that Hashem will be our God, and we will be His people. V'hine ikar hachefetz b'mishkan hu makom menuchas hashchina shehu ha'aron. What is the essential feature of the Mishkan? It is the place where the Shechina, where Hashem's divine presence is manifest, which is particularly on the Aron, the Ark, as it says in the pasuk, "V'no'ati l'chasham v'dabarti itcha me'ala kapores," as it says a little bit later on in our parsha, that Hashem will make Himself known there among the kruvim that sit over the Aron. V'sod hamishkan hu, and the secret of the Mishkan, and when the Ramban uses the word sod, it's meant to convey an idea that is mystical at its root, but I think is still accessible to us. The sod hamishkan hu sheyeh hakavod asher shachan al har Sinai shochein alav b'nistar. That what the Mishkan is about, according to the Ramban, is that the weighty presence of God that dwelled on Har Sinai should dwell over the Aron in the Mishkan, Benistar, right, in a hidden way. And there's different ways to understand what he means when he says Benistar. I don't want to get bogged down on it, but then he makes some linguistic connections. He makes connections in the words, like it says in Parshas Mishpatim, describing Matan Torah, Vayishkon kvod Hashem al Har Sinai, right? That Hashem dwelled on Har Sinai. It's going to say at the completion of the construction of the Mishkan, essentially the same language, using the same language. It's the same concept. Kvod Hashem Maleis HaMishkan. So just like Kvod Hashem was on Har Sinai, Kvod Hashem will be in the Mishkan. And so for the Ramban, the Mishkan is a perpetuation of the experience of Har Sinai. And that's the transition. That's why Matan Torah is then followed immediately by the Mishkan, the commandment to build the Mishkan, because Hashem wanted that experience to continue. It cannot continue, literally. Right? The Jewish people cannot stay at Har Sinai forever. We do not still live at Har Sinai. Here it was this amazing experience in which the Jewish people beheld the Kadosh Baruch Hu in the most intense way. There's something ideal to that, but it's impossible to maintain that. And so in order to capture some aspect of Ma'amet Har Sinai and incorporate it into the camp, the dwelling, the nation. So Hashem has them construct a Mishkan. And what the Ramban goes on to do, I'm not going to quote it because I don't want to get too tedious. But what the Ramban does is identify some parallels between Matan Torah, Har Sinai, and the Mishkan. That just like there were certain places different people could go up to, right? The Jewish people as a whole could not approach the mountain. The Kohanim could go to this point. Aaron could go to this point. Moshe could go up to this point. Same thing with the Mishkan. You have different levels of sanctity. Certain people can go into certain places at certain times. And just like there was smoke and there was fire on Har Sinai, there is smoke and fire in the Mishkan. There's the fire on the Mizbeach. There's the smoke when Hashem's presence comes down on the Mishkan. It says that the Mishkan filled with the cloud, and Moshe couldn't stay in. The Kohanim couldn't stay in. It's the same idea as Har Sinai. Just like in Har Sinai there were smoke and clouds, so too in the Mishkan. Okay, so that's the Ramban, and I guess what I'm highlighting here, what I'm trying to get across, is the fact that the Ramban isn't just teaching us what the Mishkan's about. The Ramban's also helping us to understand why we go from Matan Torah to Mishkan, because the Mishkan is the continuation of Matan Torah. I would also add, we see from the Ramban in his commentary on Sefer Devarim that the Ramban believes it's a mitzvah to remember the experience at Har Sinai. You know, if you look in your Sidurim, after Shachris, there are Sheish Zechiros, right? 6 things you're supposed to remember, right? We're coming up on one of them this week, the mitzvah to remember Amalek. But one of them is, based on this concept in the Ramban, is to remember Ma'amad Har Sinai, because it says in Sefer Dvarim, you should remember Yom Asher Amadta, the day that you stood at Chorev. And I think it's interesting that the Ramban sees this as a mitzvah, because that's exactly what the Mishkan is. The Mishkan is a perpetuation of that event that we're supposed to remember as well. And another thing, I forget if the Ramban mentions this himself, but also realize that, you know, the one of the central features of Ma'amad Har Sinai was the luchos, right? The giving of the Torah, the giving of the luchos that were presented to Moshe. The center of the Mishkan is the luchos, right? It's the luchos that are inside the Aron that Hashem manifests himself upon. That is the central focus. And so that's the approach of the Ramban, this very fascinating parallel. But I want to show you some other approaches. Another fascinating approach is that of the Abarbanel. The Abarbanel, the Abarbanel, in his approach to his commentary on the Chumash, is always presents a whole series of questions, and then he gives his explanation in rather lengthy fashion, and through his explanation he answers all the various questions. So here's how he frames the question that we've been tackling. Why did Hashem command the Mishkan and say v'shachanti b'socham? Ki'ilu haya yisbarach geshem mukaf u'mugbal b'makom mashu behefech ha'emes. Right? Why does Hashem command that we should build a sanctuary that would seem to suggest that Hashem can occupy a certain place, which suggests that Hashem has corporeality, that Hashem has physical properties? We know, right, the Abarbanel is coming at this from a philosophical perspective, a theological perspective. How do we understand this concept of having a Mishkan if Hashem has no physical properties? He's going to cite the psukim. He's going to cite psukim from Shlomo HaMelech when he builds the Beis Hamikdash, where Shlomo HaMelech declares, "Hinei hashamayim u'shmei hashamayim lo yichal kalucha, af ki habayis hazeh asher b'nisi." Right? Shlomo HaMelech himself declares that the heavens and the earth cannot contain you, Hashem, all the more so this house. The pasuk in Yeshaya, Hashamayim kisi v'aretz hadom raglai, eize bayis asher tivnu li, ve'eize makom menuchasi. Right? Yeshaya Navi says that the heavens are my seat and the earth is my footstool. What house can you really build me that I can dwell in? So the Abarbanel asks the question differently than we do. He asks the question from a theological perspective. How can we even have the concept of a Mishkan for a God that has no physical properties? And so here's just a small excerpt of what the Abarbanel answers. Uvioso yisbarach meshulal mikol gashmus lo yada hapratim lo yashgiach v'yomru shabashamayim kiso v'humruchak mi b'nei adam v'balo mitzius. That very belief that Hashem lacks physical properties may lead us to another incorrect belief, which is Hashem occupies a world totally different than ours. That Hashem is up in heaven and we are down here, and Hashem is very distant from us and is not actually present in our lives. In order to remove these false beliefs that Hashem is separated, removed, distant from us, that's why we are commanded, Tziva Shiyasa Lo Mishkan, Kodesh Umekudesh Ke'ilu Yisparach Ba'atzmo Yishkon B'Socham. That Hashem commands that we build a Mishkan, which is sacred and sanctified, as if Hashem himself is dwelling amongst us. That Ke'ilu, which I emphasized, is a very powerful word, and I think it can be understood in different ways, because we could get down into the philosophy of it, the theology of it. So is Hashem in the Mishkan? He's not in the Mishkan. It's like he's in the Mishkan, but he's not really in the Mishkan. I don't want to get bogged down in that necessarily, but basically the Abarbanel is espousing the theological idea that Hashem occupies a realm that's totally different than ours, but the Mishkan is supposed to remind us that Hashem is still present in our lives. Whether he is actually in the Mishkan, the Abarbanel would probably say, no, he's not actually in the Mishkan, but he dwells in it. Ke'ilu, he is in the Mishkan. Sheyaminu am zeh ki el chai b'kirbam, that this nation should believe that a living God is in their midst. V'hashkachaso ha'elyona davka imahem, right? And that his divine providence clings to them. V'zeh inyan v'shachanti v'soch b'nei Yisrael, I will dwell among B'nei Yisrael, v'hisalachti b'sochachem, and I will make myself to walk with them. Hashocheni tam b'soch tumasam, another pasuk that he cites. Okay, so clearly this is a very theological approach of the Abarbanel, but one I think that definitely still addresses this question of how did we get from Matan Torah to Mishkan. The Abarbanel doesn't address it directly, but based on what the Abarbanel is saying, I think what he is trying to do, I think what we can say for the Abarbanel is that he is perpetuating the theological lessons of Matan Torah, right? Hashem came down on Har Sinai to demonstrate that Hashem cares about this world, has providence in this world, is involved in our lives, and is not a being that is entirely divorced from our reality. That was demonstrated on Har Sinai. In order to continuously instill that idea within us, in order that we should not get the wrong idea and think that Hashem left Har Sinai, went back up to Shemayim, and said goodbye. That's it. That's why we have the Mishkan. Again, the Abarbanel doesn't say that this is why the Mishkan comes after Matan Torah, but I think it can be said based on what he's saying. Another amazing, fascinating approach is that of the Sforno. It's important before we see the Sforno that we see Rashi first. Rashi, it's a Rashi not on our Parsha, it's a Rashi on Parshas Kisisa, so I'll just quote it for you. But Rashi says, as Ruth mentioned, Rashi says that Ein Mukta Muchar B'Torah, that the Torah isn't necessarily presented in chronological order at times. And so Rashi says, that the Ma'aseh Egel, the sin of the golden calf, preceded the construction of the Mishkan by many days. And he gives us the timeline. Shahare b'Yud Zayin b'Tammuz nishtabru haluchos. On the 17th of Tammuz, the luchos were broken, right? That's when Moshe Rabbeinu comes down to Har Sinai, sees the sin of the golden calf, and breaks the luchos. That's the 17th of Tammuz, a day we fast on. Uviyom HaKippurim nisratz HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yisrael. Moshe goes back up the mountain on the 1st of Elul and gains atonement for the Jewish people on 40 days later on Yom Kippur, the 10th of what we know as the 10th of Tishrei. And it was the day after Yom Kippur that they began with V'chuli Terumah me'ez kol ish asher yidvenu libo, and they worked on the Mishkan for several months, and it was set up, it was erected, it was inaugurated on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, which is coming up for us on the calendar in a few weeks. So that's what Rashi says. It's based on an opinion found in Chazal. Rashi didn't come up with this on his own, but Rashi is one of the primary commentators who advances this approach that the Mishkan is an atonement for the ego. Now let me quote to you from the Sforno. The Sforno comments actually on last week's Parsha, on Parshas Yisro. What happens right after the Aseres Hadibros? So we talked about how Hashem adds a few more mitzvos, right? Hashem says, "Lo sasuni ti Elohei chesef Elohei zahav lo sasu lachem." So listen to what the Sforno says. Fascinating. He says, now that you've seen with your own eyes that you don't need any intermediaries to experience the divine presence, meaning you, the Jewish people who stood at Har Sinai and experienced the revelation of God at Har Sinai, right? Now that you've seen that you don't need any intermediaries, that you can connect with Hashem directly. So, lo sasuniti Elohei chesef, don't make for me any such intermediaries. Not only that, what does the next pasuk say? Again, this is back in the end of Parshas Yisro. Mizbeach adama ta'aseli. Right? You shall make a mizbeach of earth. V'gam kein lo titzarech lasos heichelo shel kesef v'zulosam. You don't need to make any fancy sanctuaries for me. Right? Hashem says right after Matan Torah, you can make an altar out of dirt. You can make an altar out of earth. You don't need any precious materials to build a sanctuary to me. Right? And what does the Torah say next after that? You shall not use any metal instruments, any implements. And not only that, v'lo saleh b'ma'alos, right? There's this other mitzvah at the end of Parshas Yisro of not going up steps to the Mizbeach. Afal pi shelo atricha lasos malachos v'punim l'shochem v'sochem v'kol makom hishomer min linho kalos rosh mizbechi. Even though I'm not making you go to such great expense to build a sanctuary for me, nevertheless you shouldn't do whatever you want. You shouldn't behave with levity. But again, the idea is that you have to serve Hashem. You don't need anything special or fancy. It can be a mizbeach adama. It can be an altar of earth. Now watch what the Sforno says. This is unbelievable, right? So the Sforno says, right? He says, "B'chol makom asher as the pasuk says. I'm sorry. The pasuk says, "B'chol makom asher azkir es shemi avo elecha verachticha." Right? Wherever you invoke my name, I will come and bless you. Right? Again. You don't need anything special to bring my presence down. I will manifest wherever you call me. But what happens? The Jewish people fall. Right? The Jewish people are attracted towards their baser instincts. And even though Hashem said, you don't need any special precious metals. Lo sasuni ti Elohei chesef Elohei zahav mizbeach adama. You just need just a mundane, not mundane, but just a very plain mizbeach made out of earth. Nevertheless, the Jewish people still had certain cravings to connect with Hashem using these materials that Hashem said you didn't need to use, and that was the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the golden calf, Elo Elohecha. Asher halucha meretz Mitzrayim. This is your God who brought you out of Mitzrayim. Was an attempt by the Jewish people to use gold, to use precious metals in service of Hashem. And so the Sforno suggests, similar to Rashi or based on Rashi, that the Mishkan was a response to the reality of the Chet HaEgel. And it's a concession, as it were, that once Hashem saw that the Jewish people were not capable of following this mandate of worshiping Hashem not with anything valuable or precious, but rather that which is simple and basic, and connecting to Hashem really just from a person's heart directly to Hashem, right? The Jewish people couldn't handle that. They needed something more substantial to focus on. And so because they went in the wrong direction with the Chet HaEgel, Hashem directs them in the right direction with the Mishkan. And so the Mishkan, with all of its precious metals and its very fine crafted construction, is a recognition that the Jewish people were not ready for such a sophisticated, sublime relationship with Hashem. Instead, they needed something that they could something physical by which they could express how they feel about the relationship with Hashem. And so being able to donate the gold and the silver and the precious metals, the precious stones, all of those things is a reflection, is a recognition of the fact that the Jewish people need to do something more tangible in order to dedicate themselves to Hashem. It's not avodah zarah, chas v'shalom, but it's a recognition that they need something of substance by which to rally around. So that helps us also. That's another way of understanding how we go from Matan Torah to the Mishkan. That Matan Torah, again, even though it's out of order, nevertheless, Matan Torah was an event in which the Jewish people were able to experience Hashem directly, and in order to continue that relationship in a way that the Jewish people could appreciate, the Mishkan comes next. Again, Chet HaEgel is related in a different place for whatever reason, but according to this approach of the Sforno, the Mishkan comes after Matan Torah because the Jewish people need a means by which to connect to Hashem. Not an intermediary, but a means, something they can contribute to, something which is set aside, which is dedicated, and something which is valuable, something which has its own intrinsic value that they can kind of latch onto in their relationship with Hashem. I just want to add a couple more approaches, more contemporary. The next one is from Shadal, Shmuel David Luzzatto, from one of the Italian scholar of the Torah, and he suggests something a little more basic, a little bit more straightforward, and that is that there's the Mishkan is part of Hashem. Hashem forging the Jewish people as a nation, and as a nation, Hashem is our king. We are his servants, his subjects, and so in order to solidify that relationship of Hashem as our king, V'hi bishurun melech, Hashem is our lawgiver, Hashem is our sovereign. So Hashem needs a seat, needs a throne among his people. He needs a presence, as it were. Fundamentally, of course, Hashem is present everywhere. But what Shadal writes is that Achar shekiblu aleihem hamishpatim ve'atoras ve'Hashem bishurun melech, after the people accept upon themselves the laws that Hashem has given them, roishi asalo mikdash. It makes sense that they should have a sanctuary. Ki'ilu malkam shochem b'socham, as if their king is now residing amongst them. Because it is a strong symbol of maintaining a sense of unity, that Hashem should be dwelling in the center and everyone should be dwelling around him. This is a unifying force amongst this nation, and it's bringing them together as a nation, and perpetuating the commitment to his Torah, right? For Hashem to give the Torah on Har Sinai and then just leave, it's not as solidifying, it's not as unifying as Hashem giving us the Torah and then dwelling in our midst, which is getting us a little bit closer to that idea from Rabbi Sachs I mentioned, which we'll come back to in a moment. And by the way, Shadal gives voice a little bit to that question that I mentioned in the beginning of specifically this issue of why they'd be building a Mishkan if they're only going to be in the Midbar for a short time. So Shadal says, "V'afal pi she'adayin lo nigzar aleim lisakev b'midbar," right? And even though they haven't been decreed that they're going to stay for a long time in the Midbar, right? Even though the 40 years, the sin of the spies, has not occurred yet, lo ratza Hashem sheyamtinu lasos lo mikdash ad sheyichvushu v'chalku sa'aretz v'ilhem makom niuchar lios mirkaz l'chol hamamlacha. Right? Hashem did not want to wait until they settled and conquered the land. He doesn't say this, but he's basically referring to the fact that it's going to be some time, just because right when they enter the land of Canaan and take possession of it, it's still going to take some time to conquer that land, to establish themselves as a functioning country. And so because of that, it doesn't make sense to wait. Instead, they should have this unifying presence right now. They are a nation right now. V'tziva lasos mishkan mitaltel. He commanded to make a portable mishkan. Shagam b'vom el aretz yuchlu lahakimu b'chol makom shirtzu lefi tzorech hasha. So that right when they get the moment they get to the land of Israel, they'll be able to set it up and have a centralized place of connection with Hashem immediately, and not have to wait until the building of the Beis Hamikdash. The Shadal could be making this point based on the fact that that's historically exactly what happened. Right? Mishkan and Shiloh survived for almost 400 years before they built the Beis Hamikdash. And so perhaps there was some prophecy in this, but clearly Shadal is able to use the hindsight of the historical record to validate this point that they need a portable Mishkan now because they are a nation now, and it's going to take some time to set up a permanent Beis Hamikdash, and so they need something in the meantime, even if they weren't going to be spending 40 years in the desert. Before we conclude with Rabbi Sachs's idea, I just want to mention briefly what Rabbi Shimshon Raphael Hirsch writes about this. It's not in his commentary necessarily. He references it in his commentary, but it's in another place in his writings. But he reads the pasuk very carefully that commands the Mishkan. If you go back to the pasuk Ches, v'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'socham. They will make for me a sanctuary, v'shachanti, and I will dwell in their midst. Rabbi Hirsch notices in this pasuk that each side has a responsibility, right? So the Jewish people have a responsibility to make a mikdash, and then Hashem guarantees his side, v'shachanti b'socham, and I will dwell. So if they do X, I'll do Y. And so based on that, Rabbi Hirsch develops this beautiful idea that V'asuli Mikdash represents the broader responsibilities of the Jewish people to create not just an actual Mikdash, but to create a society that is conducive to holiness, that is conducive to having Hashem's presence dwell amongst them. That V'asuli Mikdash means on one level creating a Mikdash, but on a deeper level means creating the kind of society that Hashem would dwell in. V'shachanti b'socham, and Hashem promises to dwell among the people so long as they continue to create an environment that is conducive for God's presence. The Kutzker had a famous expression. People ask, where is Hashem? Is Hashem here? Hashem there? Right? And the Kutzker famously said, Hashem is wherever you let him in, right? Wherever you allow Hashem to enter, that's where Hashem is. And that's similar to what Rav Hirsch was suggesting, that Vasuli Mikdash means if we will create the space, again, not just physically, but if we create the space spiritually for Hashem to dwell amongst us, he will dwell amongst us. And coming off of Matan Torah, that clearly makes a lot of sense. That if you look at the narrative, so Hashem Hashem made this covenant with Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. He promised that we would be sent down to Mitzrayim. We were enslaved in Mitzrayim. Hashem was our God all along, right? Hashem heard our cries. But Hashem meets us at Har Sinai, as it were. Whatever manifestation of his presence, whatever that manifestation of his presence means, that happened most intensely at Har Sinai. And clearly that's the beginning of a new stage in the relationship between Hashem and the Jewish people. And so this new stage is being recognized and being perpetuated by the building of the Mishkan. Finally, Rabbi Sachs, he has a whole book on this, which I'm actually going to be talking about next month in the series I'm participating in. Rabbi Sachs has a whole book called "The Home We Build Together," which is also the title of one of his of an earlier article of his on Parshas Terumah, where he makes the very simple but beautiful observation that that Hashem is putting the Jewish people to work so that they would have their own investment into this relationship, as Ellen mentioned before, that Hashem is bringing them together as a nation by having them work on a common project, and by working on a common project to build something together and to build a space for Hashem to manifest is what brings them together as a nation. What forges them as a nation isn't just a shared experience, a shared narrative, a shared identity, but actually where they actually contribute and build something together. And when they build something together, they now have, each person has their own personal investment in that. That is an enormously unifying force. The two people that build something together are now connected or bonded in a way like never before. I mean, at the most basic level, just think of two parents that bring a child into the world, together with Hashem, creating this life together that they both contributed something to is one of the most intimately unifying forces in the world. But any sort of project, any sort of human endeavor where there's cooperation and mutual investment, that is a remarkably binding force. And so, following Matan Torah, where the Jewish people receive the Torah and are now being forged into a nation, Hashem gives them this project, this Mishkan building project that they should all participate in through donations, through volunteer service. That is what will bring them together. That is what will unify them around Hashem, around the Torah, more than anything else. And so that's basically Rabbi Sachs's approach. So this morning we looked at the approaches. We did a lot. We looked at the approach of the Ramban, the Abarbanel, Rashi, Sforno, Shadal, Hirsch, Rabbi Sachs, on how to understand not just the meaning of the Mishkan. This is what I said at the beginning. Not just understand the meaning of the Mishkan, but how to understand the Mishkan as the next thing that comes after Matan Torah, the next thing in the Torah. It may not be the next thing chronologically, as we saw, but it's the next thing in the Torah. And so understanding the essence of the Mishkan can help us to understand why the Mishkan is then appears after Matan Torah. Thank you all so much for joining. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to shout out.
Thank you, Rabbi Poupko.
My pleasure.
It was great. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi Poupko, I was just thinking about, this was transient, of course, the Mishkan, and then of course we had the Beis Hamikdash. We had two, and they were transient also. And now during our galus, during our exile, we had the Kotel, and that is unifying in itself.
Yeah,
our exile.
Yeah,
and the presence of HaKadosh Baruch Hu is there in Yerushalayim at the Kotel.
Yeah, listen, having a centralized place of serving Hashem is such a powerful force. You see it on a communal level, right? Having a shared space, having a shul, a base knesses, is something that really holds a community together. And then the global Jewish community that to all look towards the Kotel as that place where the Beis Hamikdash once stood. You're absolutely right, Ruth, and it's the idea that emerges from the Mishkan and extends to places like the Kotel, 100%. 100%.
Yasher Koach.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a great day, everybody. Take care.